Welcome back, everyone, to the FPL Script. Today's episode is Gameweek 36, or Podcast Season 1, Episode 6. I'm your co-host, Fran, and we're looking briefly with a Gameweek 35 review before we head on to our Gameweek 36 transfer plans. As far as Gameweek 35 and a general review, I think a lot of people, of course, suffered with owning Steele and Shar this week. Some people even owned both. But it was really McAllister who saved most of our weeks if we owned him, and it gave us a great opportunity to say review is clear once again on Twitter and be silly like that. At the same time, of course, you had Ederson with once again another great game from an XGC perspective, but with another clean sheet loss. The narrative is starting to change with him slightly, I think a little bit too far. And I think the Real Madrid game actually corrected that a bit because he actually made some great saves in that game. But that was really the tail of the tape of this week where no one really scored many points and you just needed one player to save your game week.
Yeah, and I think it was clearly a case of if you owned someone like Salah or Kane, and I think most people owned either of them. And also, if you owned someone like Steele or Dunk, you were obviously in a bad way when it came to Brighton defense because at least Estupinian didn't score negative points. So, at least that's they have that going for them. When it comes to our teams, I think the only differences were I had Bruno versus your Foden, I had Ederson versus your Steele, and I had Dunk versus Shaw. And if you look at Ederson once again, it's getting to a point where both sides of the argument are becoming like quite obstinate about it, and I just wish like he would get some clean sheets to justify all the pain that we've been through. But I think it's just a pipe dream. I don't think it's going to materialize this season, but one can hope. And if he can get at least one clean sheet in 37, and I think first of all not get benched in any of those games, I think that could be something of a victory or more of a pyrrhic victory for us Ederson owners. But other than that, I think Salah captain in hindsight, he scored once again, and Holland blanked despite winning a penalty, getting a penalty. And you know who won the penalty, right? Your ultra differential pick Foden. So how did you think about Foden versus Mahrez in hindsight?
Yeah, so Foden was someone that I expected to have more minutes than Mahrez simply because I think Mahrez is someone who floats in and out of the first team, or at least has in the second half of the season, whereas Grealish is someone who has pretty much nailed down that left wing position. So when it came to adjusting X-Mins for a Foden start, I thought that Foden would have more minutes. And as you mentioned, of course, Mahrez was the logical pick to go with if the minutes were exactly the same, because Mahrez also probably even has the chance of getting penalties at various times in the game. I went with Foden, of course, I said, due to that sort of X-Mins adjustment in my head. And look, Foden still had good opportunities to get an assist. Mahrez had two. That's just how it is. I don't really regret it, and I'm just happy that I didn't go for any crazier moves because Watkins to Alvarez was a move that I think a lot of people talked about, which we also covered in last week's episode. And the reason why I didn't like it is because you have to almost force a transfer in Game Week 37 if Alvarez seems to be falling out of favor or no longer is a reasonable punt. And if you really wanted to go for Triple City on that week, you're kind of blocking yourself transfer wise as you have to take out one of your forwards, which you don't really want to even touch on Game Week 37 when the transfers should be put around the midfield if you want to punt around that, or maybe a defender if you haven't already picked up someone like a Diaz in your team. And for me, as someone who doesn't own Bruno, I can see my transfers all leading to Bruno as per review right now, but there's also the opportunity to just move it around simply to someone like Mahrez or Grealish and play around that again as I look for a more riskier approach to get that sort of top 10k finish. And ultimately, as I said with Foden, I don't really regret it. And I might even think about playing him versus Everton this week, but we'll talk about that, of course, a bit later when we talk about City.
Yeah, and also when it comes to Foden, I think this is one of those statistical anomalies where I think FPL or even sites that don't cater to fantasy football don't consider XA when it comes to winning penalties, right? So Foden technically had zero point 0.8 XA straight off the bat by winning that penalty, but unfortunately that will never get registered anywhere for you to kind of show off. But hopefully at least between us expected stats fiends, at least you have that he almost got an assist for himself. I think we can move on to game week 36 transfers. It is of course a double game week, and Newcastle and Brighton have the double game week where they play each other. The biggest dilemma I think has come out of the March hamstring injury. He played for around 31 minutes, and you could clearly see that he left the field in quite a hurry because I don't think the injury was too like there's nothing positive to come from that sort of injury point of view, I think. So we are looking at whom do you replace him with. So the top two contenders, I think, right now are Gross and McAllister, assuming that most people own Mitoma already. So what are your early thoughts on people that own March?
Yeah, I think going to McAllister is the most logical option. But some people are actually on a triple Brighton mid setup, right? So that's where the
Yeah.
discussion becomes a bit livelier. And maybe even someone like Joe Linton creeps into the argument. I think with Gross, you have someone who can flexibly play multiple positions and has, even under De Zerbi, recently he's been playing right wing back. But actually, just looking at his underlying stats, they're still very good, right? Like a 0.31 XA per 90, 0.16 XG, so a little bit low, but more than reasonable as an asset for a team that actually has quite a high ceiling when it comes to goal scoring. And with Joe Linton, you have the option to go there simply because going outside of March could give you the opportunity to reassess and restructure your team for game week 37 when you have another Brighton double game week. So that is an interesting move where, of course, Joe Linton, he might not serve you very well for 37, but he could be that sort of stopgap in 36 that works quite well since he is nailed in this Newcastle team and has also potential chances, of course, of playing left wing at times. I also just prefer him to Bruno Guimaraes just based on how expected or how likely it is really for him to get involved in goals and assists.
Also, I think those are the only two midfield assets from Newcastle that you can say are nailed on to at least start both games and play majority of the minutes. When it comes to other assets, I think people are looking to kind of differentiate themselves now that we are getting towards the end of the season with someone like maybe Joe Willock or with Almiron. I think it's clear now that he's not going to start both games with Jacob Murphy clearly securing the right wing spot. But I don't think you need to be differential for the sake of being differential. Maybe you could consider Joel Linton, but I still would prefer going to someone like Gross, who is at a similar price range as March, or McAllister, who is slightly priced more, but assuming that you have some flexibility in your budget, hopefully you can stretch and go there because ultimately he was always the best pick on paper anyway.
Yeah, that makes sense. And just going back to Newcastle, of course, the priority attack wise is to focus on either Isak or Wilson, which is, of course, the hot topic for this week. So there's 60% of March effective ownership in the game. A lot of people rolled last week, and that already kind of forces things in terms of how you actually move towards the forwards this week. So if so many people are making midfield transfers, it's quite hard as well to make these forwards transfers. So that actually is quite a unique position for people who don't have that issue. And then the question, of course, becomes do you go into Isak or Wilson? And we also have the chance, given that it's the first game on Saturday, to simply just wait for a potential leak, which we've had for multiple weeks now. I think the most reasonable suggestion really at this point would be to say whoever starts this Leeds game, if it has to be one or the other, you'll just simply go for this. If let's say Isak gets benched, you just go for Wilson and transfer him in, vice versa as well. For Isak, though, I still think that I would consider transferring him in anyways, because you can see that, for example, Wilson with the start versus Arsenal, he can still be someone who gets subbed off early. So if you do value minutes, that's something that Isak does have over him. And it really just calls into question probably how you value the Leeds game in comparison to the Brighton game, because that could be where you envision Newcastle getting all their XG, but at the same time, I still think this Newcastle team have shown that they're more than capable of scoring versus any team right now, particularly at home. So United away, of course, United have been a poor away defense, but when you contextualize really with underlying stats, United are still a top five defense. And so I still like this Newcastle team anyways. Do you prefer Isak at all if let's say he gets benched, or is it very clearly Wilson for you?
I think even if Isak, so actually I have an interesting tidbit about this. I was recently watching a video released by EA Sports, and it was related to FIFA 23, I think, and it was about building a five-a-side team with the players that a player has played with. And uh, Isak actually introduced himself as Alexander Isaac. So I don't know if we should switch to calling him Isaac, but that was an interesting thing that I noticed when he was introducing himself. So anyway, I think Isaac is clear even if he is benched. So there's very little chance that Isaac is going to be benched for the rest of the season. But of course, there are fitness issues and what goes on behind the scenes. We are not aware of many things, and Eddie Howe has been notorious about these things in the past as well, where he hasn't disclosed crucial piece of information just because he doesn't want to kind of help the opposition plan around any immediate injuries. So in that sense, unless something like that happens, I would still prefer Isaac if he is going to be your one transfer, because with Wilson I think you might benefit with him starting the Leeds game, but the next game, as in game week 37 or game week 38, 37 is also a prime fixture against Leicester. So you have to think that far, at least, like the 3 games that are coming up for Newcastle, and think to yourself, do you prefer Isak playing on left wing? Let's say both of them start, and Isak will obviously start on the left wing, because I think Sean Longstaff is not back yet, at least not for the Leeds game. So that would mean that Joel Linton plays in midfield and Isak would start on left wing if everyone is fit. And if that is the case, I would still prefer Isak because he's likelier to stay on for longer on the field, even though he doesn't have penalties while Wilson is on the field. So it is clearly a case of, do you want to differentiate yourself from the field? You go for Wilson. If you just want a sensible, okay, both picks are kind of sensible if you know that both of them are starting. But with Isak, you are guaranteed that whatever adjustments happen on the field, he is going to be a part of the plans. Whereas with Wilson, I think he's one of the first ones that is disposable. Let's say they have to defend a lead, right? I think the first thing that Eddie Howe has done in the past is remove Wilson and then put on another midfielder or a winger or something like that and change the formation around to have Isak through the center. So in that sense, I think Isak is a much better pick, even if he's benched versus Leeds. But of course, that leads to a different discussion when it comes to the armband, and we'll come to that when we get to the captaincy section.
Yeah, that makes sense. In terms of defenders this week, if people have the scope to move back into Newcastle, I mean, how would you prioritize picks between Sharp, Pope, and Botman? I'm assuming, of course, everyone already has Trippier.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable assumption. And with Share and Botman, I think Share is clear, but also he costs zero point 0.7 more, I think, if I'm right. And that is quite an amount that you can maybe use for some other transfers down the line. I don't know how much money everyone has in their bank, but zero point 0.7 is quite a sum. But also, if you look at every single game, Share is always close to scoring a goal or providing an assist. So that is something that you will have to sit through, knowing that you made a conscious call of getting Share over Botman, even though you had the budget. If you don't have the budget, I think Botman is the clear pick. And with Burn, I think there is some doubt. It's a very minor doubt, but I think there is some doubt that Matt Target might get one of the games. But if that is going to happen, you might as well get the security of a centre back who's going to play 180 minutes across the double game week. I don't know if you think any differently, but except also, sorry, with Pope. I think Pope is also a standout pick if you don't have Pope, but unfortunately, I think most players are set up with either Steele, who already has a double game week, or they have, let's say, a combination of Steele and De Gea or Steele and Ederson. So if you transfer out Ederson this week, you will be stuck with a combination of Steele and Pope, and you will have to play Steele in the next double game week. I think Ederson is a much better pick for next double game week.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. And as you say, with so many people trying to go for this midfield structure of Salah and Bruno on 37 or already on
Yeah,
this, your budgets must be incredibly tight. So I would just go for Botman because he's nailed. And I mean, look, he's capable of getting assists. We saw that in Game 34.
that is that is true.
But the more pressing topic, I think, for City assets and Gameweek 36, sorry, and beyond is what to do with City punts, right? Is this the week to actually go for a punt on playing Mahrez? Because we have options like Watkins, options like Bruno, of course, that I think a lot of people will play, but so many people seem set on benching their City players this week. Should we revisit that? Because so many players within the first team actually played the full 90 minutes in a very tough game for City. So for context, Grealish had joined the punditry panel after the Madrid game and literally said this was the first time he had a cramp in a while. And this probably suggests that Pep would rotate some of his players. Even I think Luke pointed out on Twitter that he felt like KDB was a little bit tired, fatigued. This would be a prime opportunity to play a similar squad to the Leeds game that was still quite effective, but not, I think, not as devastating as City is usually versus weaker opposition. So is this an opportunity to start your Mahrez's?
Yeah, I think everyone played 90 minutes, right? There were no subs, which is, I think, the first time that has happened in the Champions League semi-final since 2007 when Alex Ferguson didn't make a single sub against AC Milan. So that's like quite a while for something like that to happen. And given that it was such a tough game and it was high intensity for the entire game, there is definite chance that the players that did not play for a single minute will get game time. And I think Mahrez is the prime contender. And also Foden, I think. But with Foden, because he doesn't have many set pieces, he does take some of them and he does not have penalties. I mean, he's nowhere near the pecking order. So with Mahrez, you at least have a decent chance that the supposition that Haaland is not going to be on the field, I think, is now getting weaker by the day because there has not been an opportunity where Haaland is not on the field because he just plays every single game. So assuming that Holland is on the field and they rotate the penalty duty and it goes to Mahrez, you at least have a decent chance of him getting a penalty. But with Foden, I think the opportunities are limited. So if you have Foden and you have to play, let's say, Watkins over him, I would still do that. But if it is Mahrez, I would rather play Mahrez than I would Watkins. Even though it is very close, because Watkins is definitely on penalties. He's nailed on for 90 minutes. And Spurs defense, even though they did keep a clean sheet against Palace, is nothing impressive. So I don't know if you think differently because you own Foden, so I'm actually more interested to know what are you doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we got any wind of news that Foden could start, I would, but it seems like I'm probably just going to go with Watkins. Still a great game,
Yeah,
Tottenham at home. It's tough, but I think Foden will have to be first bench for me.
yeah, that just makes sense because again, the game is on Sunday. There is very less chance of getting any kind of league team news. So just go with the EV and hopefully the variance goes with you.
Yeah, and on the topic of transfers, really for this week as well, I think if you have two free transfers, some people are actually considering maybe dropping Trent this week, which has been a part of a lot of review plans out there. But I think the fear, of course, is Trent in a single game week where everyone's probably going to own 5 to 6 of the double game weekers anyway, so you don't really lose out in that fixture sense. Does it actually feel good to really drop Trent this week? And is it as enticing as review would suggest?
So, just to specify, I think we are talking about people that don't own March, which is those people are in the minority because, as you said, March was 60% owned, right?
Yeah.
So, assuming that all of them are getting rid of March, I think that's one free transfer that is allocated to that. And for people that already own the optimal combination of Mitoma and McAllister, I think we can legislate in moving on from Trent, but I have actually seen narratives on Twitter saying that Trent has scored 24 points against Leicester before, so do you really want to sell him? And that, of course, I don't agree with. It has nothing to do with this season and what Trent might do, but at the same time, let's say you bring in a City defender and you bench him. I'm assuming because you have better players to play this week. You have to sit through Everton and Real Madrid at home before you actually get a chance to play them. So that's potentially 180 minutes of you kind of hoping that they don't get injured in the meantime. If it's someone like Diaz, maybe he could get a rest against Everton and that could maybe ease your doubts. But if it's maybe someone like Akanji, I don't know, or Ake is not fit, but if he were, that would have been part of the conversation. But you're just hoping that things go your way and by punting on some events that are even more out of your control than usual in FPL.
Yeah, it makes sense. Although on the topic of not owning March, I do think that people with March and triple Brighton midfield could find a way to someone like Bruno this week, actually, with downgrading
Oh,
Trent, which I think Jack on Twitter is actually eyeing up that move through Estupinian. The issue, of course, I feel like is these really are horrific Brighton defensive fixtures. So it's not exactly a move that I'd love making this week, but it is EV positive, however you feel about it. I'm actually still a little bit reluctant to actually going back to Bruno on 37, even though it's so clear on review. But that's because I think the X-Men's just haven't been adjusted on defaults, right, for Man City midfielders, and we'll get a better picture at next week. So for me, in that sort of position, I'd rather roll if I was already gambling with the City midfielders in my team. I wouldn't really schedule plans towards Bruno immediately. And in terms of people who have one free transfer, that sort of thing, I mean, do you think it's quintessential actually to go out of March if you, let's say, already own McAllister? Or do you think this is a week where you can actually roll and maybe play 5 double game weekers?
yeah, I think playing five double game weekers is not a bad strategy, but if you had planned all along to have two Brighton mids, I think you should stick to that given that they have 5 games
Yeah.
in 3 game weeks. And even if you bring them and they don't give any attack, like they don't provide any attacking returns, which is a likely scenario. I mean, there are 2 games, so there is a chance that they might score or assist even more than usual, but you wouldn't be surprised if they blank in both games, right? Because they are such tough fixtures. And even if that happens, you are still stuck with 4 points, assuming that they don't get yellow carded or red carded. 4 points is still not bad, given that it is like a guaranteed return for you
Mm.
against maybe some other midfielder, or let's say you're playing a defender like Shaw. When it comes to defenders, I'm much less likely to play a defender with a single game week over bringing in a midfielder, even if they are tough fixtures, and playing them when they have a double game week. So I think it's clear if you compare him to someone like Shaw or compare him to someone who has a single game week. But let's say you want to change your structure such that you go for a Brighton defender. As you said, I'm much less likely to go for a Brighton defender this week, and personally, I'm benching Dunk as well for Trent because the EV demands it, and I just think there's such bad fixtures with zero attacking threat that uh, if it were Estupinian, I would consider playing Estupinian because he has some attacking threat, but with Dunk, he has no attacking threat. So it's just an easy decision for me.
Yeah, fair enough. You already benched the dunk header for the season, so
Oh yeah, that's already done against Chelsea, no less, because that really hurt. Yeah.
yeah, and that's interesting, of course, because that's another way I guess you can end up with five double game makers, as you say. But in terms of other benching decisions, I think we already covered Mahrez versus Watkins. I do
Yeah.
think this is a prime week to play Watkins if for whatever reason you're not transferring Watkins out, because it seems like Watkins is still the make weight for a lot of people going into Isak and Wilson. But
Yeah.
those players like Bruno and Watkins with great home fixtures, I think it just makes too much sense to play them, and you really should. So that's kind of my view on that in terms of rounding out benching decisions. As far as captaincy for this week, you actually have the review picks in hand. So what are those for now?
Yeah, so this is as of UK time 11 p.m. We are looking at Trippier, followed closely by Isaac and then Pope. And the difference between Trippier and Isaac is just 0.1, with Isaac on 63 average X minutes. And that is subject to change, of course, once if or when you get to early team news. And if that happens, you can quickly adjust the minutes, and Isaac will be clear on captaincy if that happens, because I am very less likely to captain Trippier if we know that Isaac starts. But if Isaac doesn't start against Leeds, I would just captain Trippier. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, and I mean I've got transfer algorithm picks to hand, so I'll just say them now. I
Yeah.
mean it's Trippier, then Pope, then Isaac, and Shaw are very very close. So I've kind of kept them as your third option. But as you're kind of saying, I think this is the week where you have to just look at how important adjusting minutes is. If we get the league versus Leeds, that almost already tells you how you're going to play your captaincy out. And all the captaincies are from the same team. So really, you should always be going with the first choice player from that team, anyways. So as you say, it's going to be between Isak and Trippier, and Isak just on the condition that actually gets that start. Another thing would be maybe Wilson as well, because if you adjusted the minutes for Wilson, I think he would also appear potentially as a captaincy option, given that the Leeds game is more enticing. Would you consider actually captaining Wilson if, let's say, you had a situation where Isak was benched, Wilson starts for versus Leeds, and yeah, I mean, Trippier obviously still an option.
Yes, I would. There is some part of me that would think about captaining Wilson, but again, it's about increasing outcome variability. And if you want to, knowing that there is a chance that this could massively backfire, given that you don't have any information about the next game in a double game week, sure, you can go for Wilson, but it is a massive differential. And I assume that the Newcastle defense EO will be above 200% as well this week. So you might be in a position where you're hoping for every single of your players to blank except for Wilson. So as I said, it's a part of your, if it is a part of your decision making process, you need to consider that. But for someone like me, if I see that there is a chance to gain a lot of ground, because I think I need to make up like 63 points to get into top 100k in the next 3 weeks. So I have to bet against the field somewhere. So this might be a good chance to do that actually.
Yeah, it's a good point because I think last week I was looking at effective ownership, collective Newcastle ownership within teams, including bench, was 150%, and ownership of the Newcastle forward was something like 40%. So obviously an opportunity where if you go with the forward captaincy, you are, even if you are down on EV, you are playing with a good amount of risk that is supported by a good amount of EV anyway. So yeah, I do like that particular if you're chasing, but that's very contextual.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for listening this week. We hope you guys have a wonderful week ahead, and we'll see you guys next.
Yeah. Have a good one, guys. Bye.